Most people, if you ask them about extreme environments on this planet, they would probably think of maybe the deep sea, volcanoes, and other really specific, very exotic spots in the world. However, one that most people usually forget is actually the coastline. As promised last time, we're gonna have a closer look at especially the Croatian, the rocky coast this time. And there's a couple of things that makes it very, very special in a very harsh environment. So for a start, it is rock that you're living on, so it doesn't give you suitable substrate for roots or anything alike. But also, thinking about the coast, it is constantly exposed to sun, salt water, rain, so fresh water, and massive changes in various factors. So just thinking about the coastline here in Croatia, during the summer months, the rock actually heats up to 60 to 80 degrees centigrade in the sun, and then it gets cooled down to 20 degrees by the salt water. So that's a 60-degree flip several times a day if you are in a tidal area. So for an organism to be able to deal with that, it's already a big step. Also, any organism that wants to live around here has to be able to deal with both salt water as well as fresh water when it rains. So also this is something that not many animals on this planet can actually deal with. But also you have to deal with other factors like pressure. So right now it's pretty quiet around here, so the waves are not too tall, there's not a lot of noise. However, if there is a storm and there's big waves crashing on a Croatian coastline, as in rock coastline, there's a pressure of several tons per square centimeter building. So if I was to be sitting there during a full storm, like south wind storm as they are pretty regular in the winter time, I would probably be crushed to pieces in no time. However, there's organisms who deal with that their entire life. So let's have a look at those. So the first organism we always come across when looking at the Croatian coastline is one that actually gives the coast its very specific color code. So if you look around, you usually have white rock. Fairly straightforward since it is limestone, so by its very nature it is white. However, the closer you get to the waterline, the more you see a discoloration, so it gets almost black. Now this black color is created by something that's called Cyanobacteria. It used to be called blue algae until we found out that it's actually not an algae and it is a bacteria. So it was renamed to Cyanobacteria later on. And those are some of the oldest organisms on this planet. They are in fact also producing oxygen, and they are believed to be the first ones to have done exactly that. Now, these cyanobacteria also create the baseline for everything on the coast. So all other living organisms basically feed off exactly those. Now, where you have the highest density of those bacteria, that's where the coloration of the rock is really black. Further up, like further away from the water, it turns to gray and then white. So the ecologists are actually separating the black, the gray and the white zones on the Croatian shoreline. And this is what you can see all around us here. The last very distinct zone on the coast here is basically the tidal area. So the part of the coastline that's submerged during high tide and that's above the water during the low tide. So this zone is not black anymore, so it's just below the black line, and it's actually fairly light brown colored. And that's not because there's nothing growing there, it is because all the other animals have a much easier time feeding on the cyanobacteria in that part of the coast. Now, just to mention a few of the representatives of the animal kingdom in this area, there's a few very cool ones. So one of them is called patella. It is a very distinct snail, and unlike most other snails, it doesn't have the spiral shape on its shell. It actually grows in a shape that fits perfectly on the rock. So every patella is basically built for one specific living space somewhere on the coastline. The cool thing is that they can actually push out an acid on the edges of their shell, so that makes the rock dissolve. Just like if you would put salt acid on the rock right here now, it would just foam up and dissolve itself. Just by the very nature of calcium carbonate, that's what happens. Now these snails can actually, well, put out an acid on the edge of the shell and dissolve the rock around them, which helps them fit into a specific spot even better. And just like I mentioned before, those snails do feed on cyanobacteria. So when they are underwater, they can actually go for a walk, hike, well, what snails do, so they crawl around, and they feed on this cyanobacteria with their radula, which is a tongue that's full of teeth, and they basically scrape off the rock together with the bacteria. And that's what they feed on. When they realize that the tide is going down again, so they are at danger of falling dry, they have to quickly find their way back to their original spot. And to do that, they actually follow their own slime trail back, and then they turn around, round, until they realize it's a perfect fit now, and then they suck themselves to the underground, and basically they are sealed to survive the next 6 hours of dry. So that's just one out of a series of animals that are made specifically to survive in this harsh environment. So all these grazing snails are also the ones that make very distinct structures in the rock. So if you ever wondered why it's not possible to walk barefoot on the Croatian rock coast, those snails are the reason. So they create all those cliffs and craters and sharp edges on the rock shore. Yet another animal that managed to survive in this part of the world are barnacles. Now barnacles don't look like much, admittedly. They actually look like pieces of the rock. But really, they are part of the family of the crustaceans. So in a way, they are relatives to crabs and shrimp and to all of the other crustaceans out there. The one thing that distinctly makes them different from all the others though, is that they are sessile animals. So basically what they do is, well, as a larvae they are part of the plankton, so they just float around in the open water. And at some point, when they find a suitable substrate, and that can be on the coast, that can also be a turtle shell, a boat, can be anything that's stable enough. If you're not sure what stable means, just have a look at the previous video and we'll explain it there. But if they find a suitable substrate, they will sit down there and hold on. And basically, they are concreted to the underground. So they are grown to the rock and there's no way of getting them off without destroying the animal. Now, when they are there, they basically have two shells that can open, and when they open, they can stretch out their filter arms. So basically they have arms just like most other filter feeders, and they can wave them in the water. So it kind of looks like they're pushing water into their mouth. Really, they're filtering out plankton and feeding on that. Now, as a sessile crustacean, you do eventually run into some trouble. Crustaceans, just like most other animals, are reproductive in a sexual way. Means male has to meet female, and there's some sort of fertilization process there. Now, most sessile animals simply release sperm and egg cells into the open water, and at some point, somewhere out there, they will meet and, well, a new larvae is born. For barnacles, it does not work that way. It actually is matter of fact that the barnacles, compared to the body size, have the largest penis in the entire animal kingdom. It can be around 3 to 10 times longer than the actual body. Depending on the species of barnacle you're looking at, it can be a little more, a little less. But basically what happens is this. When they're all underwater, at the right time of the year, they open up the shell and the penis comes out. It's basically a long trunk, and it will touch all around, and if it finds another barnacle that's open and ready for fertilization, it will leave its package there. And then the larvae gets released again, and once they are out in the open water, they will again look for a nice distinct spot where they can settle down. Now barnacles, just like the patella, the snail we talked about before, They both like to be close to the water, so you will most likely find them in the black zone. And that is true for most animals. So if you look for big diversity, look closer to the water, because the further away from the water you move, the harsher the environment is. Because it's still hot, but you get less water, you get less nutrients, and it's getting more and more difficult for animals. One very distinct zone that we talked about already, the tidal area, is also very rich in marine biodiversity. So in there you can not only find lots of marine animals that just hang out in the area, but also some that are really specifically made for this particular spot. One of them is what's called the sea tomato. Very unfortunate name. It's really an anemone and it's beautiful. What it can do though is when it's out of the water, it will basically put all the tentacles on the inside, and from the outside then it really looks a little bit like a tomato. Just a bare skin, a little bit slimy look, and that really keeps it moist until it can be underwater again. When it's underwater and feeding, you will see it opening up, you see all the tentacles, and it's a beautiful red creature. Again, filter feeder, so it's purely living off the nutrients that are out in the open sea. Another important part of the marine ecosystem on the coast are so-called tidal pools. So they are basically small parts of the sea that are only connected to the actual sea twice a day during high tide. On low tide, there's a barrier that basically separates them from the sea, which also means that the salinity in those tidal pools is not really stable. So it can go up as more and more water evaporates, and then it will come down to a normal seawater level once the connection is stable. However, in those areas you can find quite a few very special animals as well. Just check this. Lots of small fishes. So here's a little blenny. Again, very tricky to see. So they all blend in fairly well. Over there you can see a snail, which is actually occupied by a hermit crab. There's anemones and algae, but all just species that can also deal with a little bit of fluctuation in the salinity of the environment. One of the things that we can take away from the coastline, which is particularly nice for sailors, is if you look at it and all those 3-4 zones are stretched out over a wide area, it basically tells you already that this is probably not a very well sheltered spot, at least for part of the year. Because if the black zone is very big, it means at some point there must be big waves washing up. So really, if you look for a very sheltered spot, you want to make sure that the black and the gray zone are as small as anyhow possible. And that is basically a dead giveaway for a spot that will guarantee a quiet night on an anchor. So when it comes to plant life on the coast, there's really not all that much, unfortunately, because it is such a harsh environment and there's really not a lot of substrate here for anything to grow any roots. Sea fennel, and actually if you taste it, it does taste a lot like fennel. Can also be used for salad, just a little bit salty. So for plants, in order to survive in this sort of environment, really they need to be sort of meaty. So if you look at those, they have rather thick leaves, so they can store quite a bit of water for them. Which means if they do get the salt spray, also if you taste them, they are a little bit salty. So they have more salt inside of themselves as the normal plants would. That means if there's salt water around them, they won't lose all their liquid. Because, well, every organism always has this need to equalize the saltiness of the inside and the outside. Also part of the reason why saltwater fish can't be in freshwater or freshwater fish can't be in saltwater. So this plant is basically playing a trick on nature by increasing the amount of salt inside its own body and therefore not losing as much water. And for all the other plants, those are the ones that really need a complete layer of soil. And that, by the very definition, is the end of the coastline on the shore side. So as soon as you find a solid layer of soil, this is it, no more coast. The coast, however, is still part of the marine environment. So next time you're sitting on a beach, doesn't matter if it's a rock coast like here in Croatia or sand beach like in Italy or anywhere else in the world, just consider that you're still sitting in the marine environment. So with all that being said, I hope you learned something new again this time, and we will see you again next time with more interesting facts on the marine life in the Mediterranean. Until then, stay tuned, make sure to hit the subscribe button, and check our other social media if you want to keep on track with where we are in the world right now and what we're doing all the other times. And I'll see you in 2 weeks. Bye bye.